When we come back, Trump's overall approval rating has just jumped, according to a recent poll, even as the COVID-19 situation worsens in the U.S. Why and how does China fit into the picture? Stay with us. Welcome back. As the U.S. death toll from COVID-19 topped 67,000 on Sunday, U.S. President Donald Trump's overall approval rating hit a high in the latest Gallup poll released on Friday. 49% of respondents approved of how Trump is handling his job as president, and 47% disapproved. Collected from April 14th to 28th, the poll shows a 6% point jump in Trump's approval rating compared to the last poll taken in early April. And given the president has come under fire for his COVID-19 response, what factors account for this rise? And what do the numbers say about Trump's chances of re-election? And how does China fit into this picture? And we're now joined by Mr. Wang Huiyao, President of the Center for China and Globalization, and from Memphis, Tennessee, by Professor Josef Mahoney from East China's Normal University. Good to see you both. So let's take a look at this 49% across party lines. The poll says 93% of Republicans, 8% of Democrats, and 47% of independents approve of the job of Trump. Trump tweeted twice about this poll. We can show you that. On May 2nd, he overstated the findings for Republicans, saying that approval ratings was 96%. Also, the poll didn't ask about November election. Then he retweeted the Gallup polls again, saying it's going well despite fake news. So let's talk about this, Professor Mahoney. First, should Trump be so happy about these figures? How do you look at it?
Well, I think there are a number of things we have to take into account. The first is, these polls come out every week or so by different organizations. They have a margin of error. It's hard to say what precisely reflects the general mood. The thing that, the story last week was that Trump was very upset and he had a major row with his campaign manager because the support was softening among his base in some of the critical states. And while we might look at a national poll as being important, as an important indicator, the presidential election is really won state by state. So last week the story was that he was losing ground in some of these critical swing states. So it's hard to balance these two things. But I think a big thing we have to look at, of course, is that, first of all, he has a solid 44% that hasn't changed over the course of his presidency, no matter what's happened. And secondly, just in the past week or two, we've seen checks showing up in people's bank accounts, as well as the business loans. And one of the controversial things that accompanied a lot of this was a personal letter from Trump. So there's been some allegation that he's kind of trying to use this to politicize the IRS, to try to bolster his support. And maybe that's helping his numbers a little bit. Or maybe it's simply the fact that a lot of people are getting tired of being at home, and he's equivocating, and he's saying maybe it's time to restart, and it hasn't been as bad as the 200,000 possible deaths. It's hard to say, but I think we have to put it all in context, and the context is really murky at this point.
And Mr. Wang, what do you think of all this? Of the 8 polls Gallup has collected this year, Trump's overall approval rating has hit 49% 4 times already, the last time being in the end of March. I mean, what accounts for the 6 percentage point increase from early April?
Well, I think this, you have to look at, as I agree with Professor, weeks by weeks. I mean, recently people are really probably fed up being at home, and also, Trump has been showing quite frequently in recent months in his news conference, so had a lot of profile, and that also helps him quite a bit, I think. But also, you see about a few days ago that former Vice President Biden has a higher poll than him, and he said Trump said, "Oh, it doesn't matter. The poll doesn't tell anything." And then when he gets ahead, and then he was really twittering about his advancement. So I don't think that we have to take that really that seriously. But I think what matters is economically. When economic figures coming out later, and then he will probably suffer, because that's really what matters. And also you see the first quarter of the U.S. is having a negative 4.8% growth, the lowest since 2008, and people seeking unemployment help is over almost 30 million. That's incredible. So that really going to hurt President Trump. So I don't think this timely little advance that really showed anything. But what matters is really the what's happened, as just Kevin has said. His former economic advisor, the AEI economic director, one time I was saying the youth unemployment could be reached 20%. So that really going to hurt. So we have to see. I don't think this is in the end yet.
And Professor Mahoney, amid the pandemic, it seems many Americans are rallying behind their governors rather than around their presidents. A recent nationwide survey found that in all 50 U.S. states, residents believe their governors were doing a better job of handling the coronavirus outbreak than Trump. And according to this graphic from Vox, governors enjoyed across the board increases in approval ratings ranging from up 26% to up 1%. And analysts say these are examples of a rally round the flag effect, a temporary boost in popularity that leaders get during a crisis usually. World leaders are also seeing their approval ratings trends rise. By comparison, why is Trump receiving such a small bump, and what does this say about the power dynamic going on there in the states right now between federal and state governments?
Well, for those who are familiar with the federal system in the United States, there is a clear divide in many cases of power. And most of the public health measures that are being, let's say, actually employed on a state-by-state basis are being employed by state governments. And there's been some debate and argument between Trump and some of the governors, particularly some of the Democratic governors, about what are the limits of federal power. What sort of authority does Trump have to command local economies or local decisions? There's been, of course, a lot of pushback from Governor Cuomo in New York. So I think the first point is, in the very early days of this outbreak, the Trump administration, by some reports, more or less abandoned a national strategy that had been put in place for this type of problem should it arise. And this essentially shifted responsibility to state governments, which incidentally had most of the power to begin with. At the federal level, what you really have is the power of coordination. You have the power of being able to leverage resources in. But that didn't happen early on for a number of reasons, and so this responsibility shifted to where the real power existed in this case. So I think a lot of people have supported the governors because their lives have depended on it. In the case of Trump, as I said before, his base is invested in him. It's an identity issue at this point. They've been with him through a lot worse. They're going to continue to stick with him. I don't know if they're going to ride a collapsing economy with him, and I'm not sure that the Democrats can necessarily exploit that, or they would want to, even if they could. But the point is, his bump was never, I don't think you'll ever see his bump go over 49%, because there's always been this 51% that has been really unhappy with him. And but the real thing that we have to keep in mind is he won the last election with 49%, the way the Electoral College is structured. That's really all he needs. He only needs 50% to win. So how this actually plays out in the election campaign and what he has to do to keep those numbers up and how much of a bump he needs, not much.
49% is still a very high approval rating. Mr. Wang, does it puzzle you that Trump's approval rating still sits so high? Because when you look at the containment efforts, the United States has now registered more than 1.1 infection cases. Its death rate, its death cases now stands over or less than 70,000. For people who are watching this outside of the States, they might think that the containment was a failure. What do you think?
Absolutely. I think that he will have a very hard time ahead. We're having the world economy is also slowing down. IMF forecast negative 3%, and WTO even projected 1/3 of the will be in recession. So as a matter of fact, I think that U.S. economy is going to suffer heavily from this coronavirus. So the way is to really stop this. Let's blame each other, and let's really focus on how U.S. can demonstrate some leadership in terms of turning the world economy around, because that's really I think going to help Trump rather than goes to the conspiracy and then blame China and other countries. So I think the key to his success, to his election, is to really stop the recession, stop the world economy collapse, and stop the global value chain breaks down. And that's really the most important thing for him. I think right now, all the states are not happy. Also, the economy is suffering, and so we really have to see him working towards the other direction rather than playing this bashing China, which is not going to help him, I think, in the end.
That's for sure. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Wang Huiyao, President, Center for China and Globalization, and Professor Josef Mahoney joining us there live. And that's going to do it for this edition of The Point. Thank you so much for watching, and bye for now.